Joel Osteen built a faith empire on hope and prosperity, but now shocking questions, rising criticism, and unexpected controversies have many asking, is his kingdom of positivity starting to crack? Joel Osteen has long been known as the smiling face of modern American megachurch Christianity, a preacher whose upbeat sermons and polished television presence transformed him into one of the most recognizable religious figures in the world. For years, he stood at the pulpit of Lakewood Church in Houston, delivering messages of hope, prosperity, and unwavering faith to tens of thousands in person and millions more through television screens. His words were smooth, his confidence unshakable, and his brand carefully built around positivity and promise. But lately, whispers have grown louder, critics more emboldened, and the once unshakable image of certainty now seems surrounded by serious questions. Joel Osteen built his empire on optimism. He rarely spoke about fire and brimstone, preferring instead to emphasize personal growth, abundance, and divine favor. That approach drew enormous crowds and even larger donations, turning Lakewood Church into one of the largest congregations in America. His best-selling books flew off shelves, his televised sermons reached international audiences, and his lifestyle reflected immense success. To supporters, he was proof that faith and prosperity could walk hand in hand. To critics, however, that prosperity always raised eyebrows. The first cracks in the narrative did not appear overnight. Over the years, controversies flickered and faded, each one leaving behind a lingering shadow. Questions about financial transparency followed him persistently. Reports about the church's wealth and Osteen's personal net worth fueled debates about whether spiritual leadership should look so extravagant. While Osteen consistently defended his ministry and emphasized that his wealth came largely from book sales rather than church salary, skeptics were not easily convinced. Then came moments that intensified public scrutiny. Natural disasters struck Texas, and the role of megachurches during crisis became a hot topic. When Lakewood Church initially did not immediately open its doors as a shelter during a devastating hurricane, social media erupted. Though the church later did open and provided assistance, the damage to public perception had already been done. Critics painted the delay as symbolic of something deeper, suggesting that the message of compassion did not always align with action. Supporters countered that logistical challenges had been misunderstood and unfairly amplified. Still, the headlines lingered. Financial questions returned in unexpected ways. A startling discovery of cash and checks hidden inside the walls of Lakewood Church reignited debate about accountability and oversight. Even though investigations did not directly implicate Osteen in wrongdoing, the story became fuel for speculation. For critics, it was another chapter in what they viewed as a pattern of opacity. For loyal followers, it was an unfortunate incident blown out of proportion. Yet the narrative that things aren't looking good began circulating more widely. Adding to the complexity is the changing cultural landscape. America's relationship to organized religion has shifted dramatically in recent years. Younger generations express skepticism towards institutions, particularly those associated with wealth and power. Megachurch pastors who once commanded admiration now face sharper interrogation. Joel Osteen's style, once revolutionary in its positivity, now feels to some like a relic of a different era. In a climate demanding authenticity and transparency, polished optimism can appear disconnected from real-world struggle. Media coverage has also evolved. In the age of viral clips and instant outrage, a single sermon excerpt can ignite controversy. Osteen's teachings about prosperity, when clipped and shared without context, often spark heated debate. Critics argue that prosperity theology risks blaming individuals for their hardships, implying that insufficient faith leads to financial or personal struggle. Osteen has repeatedly rejected that interpretation, insisting that his message centers on encouragement rather than condemnation, but perception often outweighs intention in the digital arena. There is also the broader scrutiny facing high-profile religious leaders. Scandals involving other televangelists have cast a long shadow across the entire industry. Even without direct accusations, association alone can breed suspicion. The public has grown wary, and trust, once given freely, now demands evidence. Joel Osteen operates within that environment, where every decision is examined under a microscope. Despite mounting criticism, Osteen remains steadfast. His sermons continue, his congregation remains large, and his books still find eager readers. Inside Lakewood Church, the atmosphere often feels unchanged. Music swells, hands rise in worship, and Joel Osteen's familiar smile greets the crowd. Yet outside those walls, the conversation is shifted. Analysts debate whether the era of the untouchable megachurch pastor is fading. Social commentators question whether prosperity preaching can maintain relevance in times marked by economic uncertainty and social division. The tension between image and reality fuels much of the current narrative. Osteen's brand thrives on certainty and blessing, but the world around him feels increasingly uncertain. Inflation rises, communities face hardship, and many Americans struggle with disillusionment. In such times, messages of guaranteed victory can sound either deeply comforting or painfully detached, depending on the listener's perspective. That divide shapes the conversation about his future influence. What makes the situation particularly compelling is that Joel Osteen himself rarely engages in combative defense. He avoids direct confrontation with critics and seldom addresses controversies from the pulpit. That strategy once preserved his brand's positivity, but today it can be interpreted as evasive. Silence in the digital age does not always equal strength. It sometimes invites louder speculation. For longtime supporters, none of this diminishes their faith in his leadership. They see a pastor who has inspired millions, provided hope during despair, and built a global ministry from humble beginnings after unexpectedly stepping into leadership after his father's passing. They argue that scrutiny comes with visibility, and that success naturally attracts detractors. To them, the narrative of decline is exaggerated. Yet the conversation persists. Headlines hint at trouble, commentators analyze attendance trends and donation patterns, cultural critics debate whether prosperity preaching aligns with shifting spiritual values. Each new discussion adds another layer to the unfolding story. Whether these challenges represent a temporary storm or a lasting shift remains uncertain. One thing is clear: Joel Osteen's position in American religious culture is no longer unquestioned. The admiration remains strong among followers, but the skepticism has grown more organized and vocal. In an era defined by transparency demands and institutional distrust, even the most polished public figures must adapt or risk erosion of influence. As the spotlight intensifies, the central question becomes unavoidable. Can Joel Osteen navigate this changing landscape without fundamentally altering the message that made him famous? Or will the very optimism that built his empire become the element critics cite as its weakness? The story is far from over, but the atmosphere has undeniably changed. Things may not be collapsing, but they are certainly shifting, and every shift invites speculation about what comes next. Joel Osteen now stands at a crossroads, shaped not only by criticism, but by transformation in how faith itself is consumed and questioned. The rise of online theology debates, deconstruction movements, and independent spiritual influencers has fragmented audiences that once gathered under singular, charismatic leaders. Where television once amplified his reach almost uncontested, digital platforms now create parallel voices ready to challenge, dissect, and reinterpret every sermon. In that arena, reputation can fluctuate overnight. Observers note that megachurch culture as a whole faces reevaluation. Lavish auditoriums, celebrity-style pastors, and multi-million-dollar operations once symbolized growth and divine favor to many congregants. Today, those same symbols can trigger discomfort. The optics of wealth attached to spiritual leadership spark intense moral debates. Even if finances are legally sound, perception plays a powerful role. Joel Osteen's mansion, lifestyle, and high-profile presence continue to circulate in discussions about whether spiritual authority should mirror corporate success. There is also the matter of expectation. When a preacher builds a brand on victory, abundance, and breakthrough, followers may expect visible demonstrations of those promises during crisis. Economic downturns and personal tragedies test theology in deeply personal ways. Some former supporters have publicly shared stories of feeling disillusioned when their lived experiences did not align with sermons promising favor. While countless others testify to encouragement and renewed hope, the contrast fuels ongoing controversy. Media interviews sometimes place Osteen in difficult territory. Questions about social issues, politics, and moral controversies often meet measured, carefully worded responses. His reluctance to take strong public stances on polarizing matters has been interpreted in multiple ways. Admirers see a pastor determined to unify rather than divide. Critics see avoidance, arguing that influential leaders carry responsibility to speak clearly on pressing societal concerns. That tension keeps his public persona under constant evaluation. Yet it would be simplistic to portray his situation as pure decline. Lakewood Church continues to draw massive crowds. Broadcasts still reach international viewers. His social media presence commands millions of followers. Financially and structurally, the ministry remains formidable. The question is less about immediate collapse and more about long-term trajectory. Influence is not only measured by size, but by cultural resonance, and resonance shifts over time. Generational change may prove decisive. Younger audiences often seek vulnerability and raw authenticity from leaders. They gravitate toward conversations about doubt, mental health, systemic injustice, and complex theology. Osteen's trademark optimism sometimes appears carefully curated rather than emotionally exposed. While that consistency reassures many, it may not fully satisfy an audience craving transparency about struggle and uncertainty. Adapting without abandoning core identity presents a delicate balancing act. Another dimension shaping the narrative involves trust in institutions. Across sectors, government, media, corporations, public confidence has eroded. Religious institutions are not immune. When stories emerge about hidden money discoveries or disaster response controversies, they feed into a broader cultural suspicion. Even isolated incidents can reinforce pre-existing doubts. For Joel Osteen, maintaining credibility requires navigating not only personal scrutiny, but systemic distrust. Supporters argue that much criticism misunderstands his theological framework. They insist his emphasis on hope does not deny hardship, but offers a lens through which to confront it. They point to charitable initiatives, community outreach, and disaster relief efforts as evidence of tangible impact. They emphasize that millions credit his messages with helping them overcome depression, addiction, and despair. In their view, the good far outweighs the controversy. Nevertheless, public narratives often thrive on tension rather than nuance. Headlines favor dramatic framing. Social media amplifies extremes. A single viral critique can overshadow years of steady ministry work. In that environment, perception can feel like a tidal force. Leaders either learn to surf it or risk being swept into a caricature. Joel Osteen's calm demeanor and refusal to engage in public feuds may protect his brand's tone, but it does not silence the conversation. What makes this moment especially significant is timing. Cultural shifts rarely announce themselves with clear endings and beginnings. They unfold gradually until one day the atmosphere feels unmistakably different. For decades, prosperity-centered preaching occupied a visible and influential space in American Christianity. Now that space feels contested. The question surrounding Joel Osteen is not whether he will continue preaching, but whether his style will retain the same cultural dominance it once held. Behind the scenes, adaptation may already be underway. Ministries evolve strategically, refining outreach methods, updating messaging formats, and expanding digital engagement. The ability to pivot while maintaining identity often determines longevity. If Osteen successfully integrates greater transparency and contextual awareness without sacrificing optimism, he may solidify his legacy for another generation. If not, critics may define the narrative more forcefully. In the end, the phrase, "things aren't looking good," captures more of a mood than a measurable collapse. It reflects heightened scrutiny, louder criticism, and a cultural climate less deferential to celebrity pastors. Joel Osteen remains influential, wealthy, and widely followed, yet undeniably more questioned than before. Whether this chapter becomes a turning point or merely a turbulent season depends on forces both within and beyond his control. For viewers watching from the outside, the unfolding story offers a window into broader conversations about faith, power, money, and modern media.
Joel Osteen stands as a symbol within that debate, admired by millions and challenged by many. His future will likely reveal as much about the direction of American spirituality as it does about one pastor's resilience. The spotlight has not dimmed, but it has sharpened, and under sharper light, every detail appears clearer.